Okay, so that's kind of how lawyers thinking about tort law, if you're using something like the hand balancing test, would think about doing some kind of really back of the envelope, very rough risk management calculation. How do professional risk managers do it? Well, they do it in a whole variety of ways, most of which are going to be more sophisticated than what I'm going to show you right now. But what I'm going to show you right now is kind of a recognized basic way of doing risk management calculations, quantitative calculations that go a bit beyond the learned hand formula. So here's the formula that I'm putting up on the screen for you, and here's what it means. ALE is annual loss expectancy. The annual loss expectancy, in other words, how much are you expecting the loss to be in any given year, will be equal to the single loss expectancy. What do you expect a loss to be for any single event, times ARO, the annual rate of occurrence. How often do you expect this loss to occur in a given year? So, these are some nice kind of cool management-y sounding formula. Again, if you look at it, it kind of breaks down. It really makes sense, right? What's going to cost you for a whole year? Don't get caught up right now in whether it's a calendar year or a fiscal year. It doesn't really matter for this purpose, right? What's it going to cost for a whole year? Well, what does any one incident cost? Maybe I'll be able to quantify that. And how many times do I expect the incident to occur in a year? Maybe I'll be able to quantify that. Okay. So how do we quantify what the single loss expectancy is? Well, we really have to know what the value is of the asset that's at risk. Now that should be relatively self-explanatory. I mean, if we've got some customer data that provides information that enables us to compete in the marketplace and price our product to our customer, that's going to be an asset, and that asset's going to have a certain value, and that value might be, what's the kind of marginal benefit having that customer information gives us over our competitors in, our pricing in the marketplace. Even more straightforward, you might say, all right, we've got, we're selling a commodity. We've got barrels of oil, right? Those barrels of oil today are worth X dollars on the commodity market. I mean, that's much more straightforward. But even as my example of the customer data suggests, it can be really hard to calculate this. So, I mean, even though this sounds kind of highly quantitative, asset values can be hard to calculate and figure out, especially when we're talking about data. So even when you're doing this on a quantitative basis, you're going to sort of often have to sort of do your best estimates, and there are best practices, and the people that do this for a living will know kind of the best accounting practices and so on for doing that. All right, the EF in this calculation is what's called exposure factor. The exposure factor is the percentage of the asset value that will be lost if the risk is realized. And that, of course, is going to range from 0 to 100%. So, I mean, it could be that the risk happens and it really doesn't have any impact on the asset value at all, and then it's 0, right? Could be that the risk happens and the asset is completely destroyed, right? So let's think about our barrels of oil. The risk is that there's a major fire and explosion at the plant, or at the facility where the oil is being stored. If there's a major fire, all the oil will be burned up and destroyed. Exposure factor is 100%. Now, more likely, what we're thinking about, a risk we're thinking about is not a major fire that destroys the whole facility, but a fire that eventually gets contained, and that, let's say, destroys 50% of the facility, and 50% of our barrels of oil, right? So then our exposure factor would be 50%. We'd multiply the value of the oil. Let's say the oil's worth $1 million. Our exposure factor is the risk we're facing is a fire that would destroy half of our barrels of oil. So then, our SLE is going to be $500,000. All right, the other piece in this calculation is the annual rate of occurrence. What is the annual rate of occurrence? It's going to be some kind of multiplier. So, example, if it's going to likely happen the risk is likely to be realized once a year, our multiplier is 1. If our risk is likely to be realized twice a year, it's 2, and so on, right? If the risk is likely to be realized every other year, well, then it's 1/2 each given year, so it's 0.5, right? If it's likely to be realized once every 25 years, 0.04, right? You can see how this math works out. And you really, if you're trying to do this kind of thing in a basic risk management setting, it doesn't have to get very much more granular than this. Again, it's quantitative, but it's pretty rare that you're going to have the kind of granular level data that are going to allow you to predict, this is going to happen, 13 times this year. It's just, that's highly unlikely. You're probably going to have to round off, 1, 5, 10, 2, every other year, every 5 years, every 10 years, and that'll give you kind of rounder numbers. Okay, so let's work through a specific example with these figures. So this is a very unrealistic example, but it's kind of straightforward, so it shows you how you would work this out. So let's say we have a building that's valued at $100,000. Let's say a fire would damage the building, would damage 25% of the building. And let's say that we have some insurance data, underwriting data that suggests a fire of this sort is likely to occur once every 10 years. So what we have here, we'd have our single loss expectancy, our asset value is $100,000. Our exposure factor is 25%, so it would damage 25% of the building. And so our SLE is $25,000. Then we factor our ALE, right? We have our SLE is $25,000. Our ARO, annual rate of occurrence, is going to be 0.1 because it's a tenth once every 10 years. And so therefore, we're going to have a ALE of $2,500. Okay, so what does that mean if we have an ALE of $2,500? I mean, you could say, all right, that means I should spend about $2,500 on fire suppression technology. That's $2,500 is the ALE. That means in any given year, that's my sort of possible exposure. And so if I'm spending $2,500 a year on that technology, then over the course of 10 years, I'll have spent the total amount of the potential loss, and I'll have evened out my risk. So you could say that, and that is, what this kind of quantitative calculation, in a sense, is designed to do. It's designed to tell you how much you should spend on mitigation, on risk management. But you do have to realize that this whole thing is not usually going to be precise. It's usually going to be unrealistic. So think, for example, about the asset value. All right, our asset value of the building, $100,000. If I sold this building tomorrow, I could sell it for $100,000. Okay, but if there's a fire, I may lose. There may be employees who are injured or killed. How am I going to value that? If you have to put money value on that, you sort of can. I mean, there are actuarial ways of doing that. And then, of course, there's value on that goes way beyond money, right? So we say 25% of the building, but are different parts of the building potentially more valuable than others? I mean, is there a manufacturing equipment that's really expensive to replace as opposed to a warehousing area with goods that I would lose that are easier to replace? What about opportunity costs? What about downtime? I mean, if the production equipment is destroyed, if that portion of the building is destroyed, does that mean that I'm out of business for a period of time? All those things, if you really, really wanted to dig into the granular level, you'd have to include in your spreadsheet. Now, there are people that do this kind of thing, right? That really crunch these kind of numbers and that try to do this. And there are, even at higher levels, there are ways of using big data to try and do this. But that's not what we're trying to do for our purpose right now in this course, or to introduce these general principles. And it's not necessarily what you need to do, kind of at the level of being a general counsel or an outside counsel in a business talking about cybersecurity and kind of introducing some of these principles. You're trying to begin to get the general sense, so at least you can put some numbers on things.